Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Adi, and today we have our very first Series 10 team report with the team, maybe the most standard team in the format, but I promise you, the man who invented the team is here on the channel. We have Kunal Kanodia. Kunal, how you doing?
Doing great, Adi. Glad to be back once again.
Yeah, it's good to have you. I know you were on the channel like a week ago with a Players Cup 4 team report that you built with Alex Underhill. But for those who might have missed that, do you want to tell everyone a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Kunal. I've been playing VGC seriously since 2019 at the start. I qualified for Worlds in 2019, and then I've been kind of on a tournament hiatus recently, but I had some results at Dallas, and then just recently I got top 8 in the Battle Frontier Series 10 tour, the first one of the format.
Yeah, and I feel like a lot of people who maybe didn't really like Dynamax formats have been coming back into the fray. I don't know if you've been playing other than like Players Cup any of the big grassroots tournaments, and so I know
Yeah.
this one was the first one in a while.
Yeah. I played some Rose Tower ones towards the end of last year, but it's been a long time since I've played seriously in a tournament.
Doesn't it feel good to play without Dynamax?
It feels so good, man. The game is different. It feels like I get to play Pokemon again. It's so great.
Yeah, I totally agree. And so let's jump into the team. So this is the Xerneas team that you've probably seen all over the ladder in every room tour. But do you want to talk me through how you built this team?
Yeah, so the format got announced. Me and a few friends, including Audie, were hanging out in a Discord call. We were prepping for some room tours because they were, trying to figure out how to get them running in the VGC room on Showdown.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, I think Xerneas seems really good. We have Incin and Rillaboom, both like insane supports for Xerneas. How do we make it beat Zacian? And the first thought that came to my mind was Volcarona is like really good. We used it a little bit in Series 8 to handle Zacian teams and to handle like Ice Rider and stuff like that. And so we slapped Volcarona onto the team with a little bit of a different set than this, but um, we added the Volcarona, and then Urshifu seemed really good at the time. It was the first hour of the format, I'd say. We thought, I think pretty much everybody thought Urshifu Gothitelle stuff would be broken. So we added an Urshifu and a Regieleki to our team just to account for like the Tornogre matchup and stuff like that.
Hmm.
And I think it was it was the second or third room tour of the day. And I ran it, Audie ran it, and our other friend Rajan also ran it in that room tour. And we actually ended up getting, I ended
First,
up winning
second,
the
and
tournament.
third.
Yeah, first,
Yeah.
second, and third in the tournament.
So Rajan and I played in the semifinals. You can see the date right down here. It says July 1st. And so, like, again, the day that the thing got announced, literally that night, Rajan and I played in semifinals, and then Rajan beat me and met Kunal in finals. Actually, the replays are really cool. It was featured on a Dave Katesh's video. Also, like, came out the next day about
Yeah.
like how to play the format, which is also really cool. So really fun. The sets were obviously a lot less optimal than they ended up becoming. I think we had Shed Shell in Cineroar because we were
Yeah.
really scared of Gothitelle.
Yep.
It was pretty interesting. But I haven't honestly been playing with this team very much, but you have kept iterating and kept improving it and made it as optimal as you can. In 20 days before the format starts.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk about the sets and why the Pokemon are built the way they are?
Yeah. So let's start off with Xerneas. I think anybody who's played prior to 2020 will recognize the set. It's very standard: Geomancy, Moonblast, Dazzling, and Protect. Xerneas sets up its Geomancy with Power, gets +2 special attack, speed, and special defense, and then just like goes to town on the game. And if it's able to get into that position, it's pretty much winning every game. In terms of the EVs, at the start of the format, we just kind of slapped on a very standard 252 252 spread. And towards the Battlefront tournament, I actually was thinking about going like a modest Xerneas or a more bulky Xerneas, but I had just been playing with this set for so long that I decided to keep it because the mental calcs were just like in my head. I knew my speed tier, I knew what my damage looked like. And so that's the reason it stayed like timid, max, basically. In terms of Incin, I think that Safety Goggles is probably its best item. So we started off with Shed Shell, and it was like good against Gothitalization teams. We got to switch out the Incin turn 1 into Volcarona and kind of catch the Xerneas that way. But Safety Goggles lets it match up both into a Mungus, which the team otherwise has a pretty tough time with, and into opposing Volcarona that started becoming popular like pretty early in the format. So we get to parting shot Xerneas through Volcarona redirection. We get to click Flare Blitz into like a Rillaboom or something, or a partner Pokemon through a Mungus. and stuff like that was like very, very important. The EV spread on Instant is actually really interesting, I think. So I had a slower Instant for a while, and I felt like losing the Instant fake out war on lead was very negative for this team. And so what I wanted to do for the Battle Frontier tournament is I wanted Instant to hit 92 speed, because that's like just about the most amount of investment you can put into speed while still having a favorable roll for Xerneas Moonblast. So I went 92 speed, and then I got as favorable of a roll as I could to live +2 Xerneas Moonblast, while favoring HP investment. So with this spread, it hits 92 speed, and I think it's a 25% chance to get one shot by Xerneas Moonblast, which is really good. And it's also a roll to live Landorus Eye Earth Power, Life Orb Sheer Force Earth Power. It's not a favorable roll by any means, but it is a roll, and that did come up during my tournament run. So the next one is Volcarona. It's standard, kind of standard now. Xerneas support, just really good against Zacian, really good against Rillaboom, really good at checking Ice Rider, and a lot of other physical mons. This EV spread, donated very generously to me by Justin Burns, my good friend, lives Urshifu Water Surging Strikes 100% of the time with Citrus Berry, if you don't get any burns. But obviously, Urshifu is hitting 3 times. You have a chance to burn it on each hit. And so if you get a burn early in that cycle, you're taking a lot less damage.
And this was the set that we ran literally day one. Yeah, I think Justin was in the call with us while we were building too.
Yeah, he posted this calc. As I said, like I want to add Volcarona to the team. He ran this calc and he posted in the chat, and we were like, okay, you know what? This is the spread. And so a lot of Volcarona I faced in the tournament actually were Quiver Dance. And they had like Heat Wave, Bug Buzz, Quiver Dance, Protect, or like Quiver Dance, Rage Powder, or whatever is the last two. But for me, I felt like Overheat was really important because the increased damage on Pokemon like Stack Attacka and Rillaboom and dodging wide guards was just like really relevant to this team. Volcarona also will stall out opposing Xerneas extremely well with Struggle Bug, because Xerneas can't hit it very well as it resists, and it's always dropping the Xerneas special attack. And so like with Struggle Bug, you actually have a really good timer win condition on cart versus opposing Xerneas. If they get boosted early and it starts to get out of control, you can stall them out very slowly with Volcarona, and you're going to win on HP. You need Rage Powder to cover Zacian, and I felt like Protect was just too important to drop. I know a lot of people didn't end up running it, but with so many teams having this like instant Rillaboom core of constantly cycling fake outs, having the Protect was just so valuable. So our next one here, Rillaboom, it needed to be Assault Vest actually for this team, because I needed a way to match up positively into Tornadus Kyogre teams and into Calyrex Shadow teams. And so this Rillaboom spread, I think it lives boosted Xerneas Moonblast, and it also lives 2 Calyrex Shadow Astral Barrages with Grassy Terrain Healing. And then it lives +1 Zacian Behemoth Blade, and it lives instant Flare Blitz. So that's what the EV spread was calced for. I really liked Woodhammer because a lot of the Kyogre teams are running Serena, and so I don't get to click Grassy Glide into them. And so having a strong way to hit the Kyogre was just like super valuable. And then U-turn was always like, having the pivot move on Rillaboom, having it on Instant as well with Parting Shot is just insane for Xerneas repositioning. You get to protect the Xerneas, pivot out to your other Pokemon, have more fake outs, have Rage Powder, stuff like that. I'll skip over the Urshifu because I'm sure you can see this set is crazy. So
it's very different.
We'll go to the Regieleki. Regieleki again was like a super matchup dependent mon. I think during my tournament, I only ended up bringing a Lecky to 2 matchups throughout the entire tournament, and they were versus my round 4 opponent who had Shadow Rider, and versus my top 8 opponent who had Tornadus Kyogre. And so what Sasha Lecky does for those matchups is you get to lead Regieleki into Tornadus Kyogre and click Electroweb, and they can't kill you turn 1. Because if they're setting Tailwind, the Kyogres only bring you down to Sash, and if they're double attacking you, then you're getting your Electroweb off before you die. And then that puts Xerneas in a pretty favorable position from there. And it's kind of a similar thing versus Ghost Rider, right? Like, even though a lot of Ghost Rider teams run Mienshao, you can force a really favorable trade by clicking Electroweb and like Surging Strikes with your Urshifu. and you're guaranteed a kill on the Mienshao or a speed drop on the Caloric Shadow. So, stuff like that. And so Focus Sash felt really important. And then our last mon, Urshifu Water. So this is a set that my really good friend Adrian Siegler brought to me, literally I think the day before the tournament, because I had been complaining for a long time about how Urshifu really wanted Sash and Aleki also really wanted Sash, and there was like a huge clash between those two mons. And I didn't feel like I could beat Tornadus Kyogre effectively without Regieleki having Sash. So he brought me this spread, which is, it hits 134 speed stat, and it lives Modest Xerneas Dazzling Gleam unboosted. And it lives Feint from Mienshao plus Astral Barrage from Caloric Shadow. And then it also lives Rillaboom Grassy Glide from Assault Vest Rillaboom. And so, it's bulked out to live all these attacks that you normally would want the Sash for. And Urshifu has like, pretty decent bulk otherwise.
Pretty decent physical bulk. You put a lot of special defense investment, so it's not bad.
Yeah, exactly. And then with Mystic Water and Adamant, even with no attack investment, your Surging Strikes is hitting harder than Max Jolly Sash Urshifu would. And so this Pokemon, easily the best Pokemon on my team for this run. I faced a lot of Zacian teams, and they just don't have a way to play around Incineroar Urshifu lead with Volcarona, Xerneas, and back. It's, the Surging Strikes is just doing too much damage. It's killing their Incin through Citrus Berry. It's killing their Landorus. It's killing their Thundurus. It's killing their Zacian in 2 hits. It's just crazy. And it's taking no damage from any of these. Like, Intimidated Zacian with Sacred Sword at neutral is like a 3-hit or 4-hit KO on this Urshifu. When you add in Grassy Terrain Healing, it becomes a 5 or 6-hit KO. And so things like that, just, this mon hard carried my run for real. So real shoutouts to Adrian for this one. I think something, like, it's really unconventional, but when you think about it, between the 134 speed stat and 163 speed stat, what mons really are there that you're worried about, right? There's like Landorus Therian, and then there's like Tapu Lele, and then there's
like max speed primals.
Yeah, exactly. And Urshifu, I feel like, doesn't really care about those very much, or rather, the rest of the team doesn't need Urshifu to care about those very much, because you have answers to all of those Pokemon elsewhere on the team. Right, Xerneas is really favorable into all of those. Rillaboom is also pretty favorable into most of them. And so Urshifu is just allowed to be pretty slow and kind of do its thing here. The other thing that this Urshifu did amazingly was so a lot of the Volcarona in the format are kind of similar to my spread, right? Like, they're very bulked out to live Urshifu Water Surging Strikes. And I was able to just kill all of them if I didn't get burned on the first hit, because Mystic Water hit stronger, and so they didn't meet their calcs and they died, which was so valuable for this run.
Yeah, that's really cool. I like this set a lot. It's just very optimized for the format, and this is an example of I think that people are still just kind of taking sets from their Series 9 or Series 8 or Series 7 teams and putting them on, assuming that they're going to work in the same way. But without like max airstream in the format, Urshifu can really just play a different role. It is allowed to be bulkier, and I think it's really cool to see this and how people are going to continue to realize like how Dynamax warped the sets we were running and how we're allowed to like run different things.
For sure. Yeah, and it's always, for me, Adrian and Justin Burns are kind of these people, but it's super valuable to have people that force you to think about the format in a different way and challenge the way that you think about your sets, because I would not have made it to top 8 without this Urshifu, for example, or without this Volcarona. And having people that challenge the way that I think about the game and force me to use weird sets like this is just super valuable.
Mm-hmm. And I guess to speak more abstractly about Xerneas, I mean, Xerneas is such a powerful Pokemon. It's it's so easy to power through teams, and teams have to have very dedicated responses to it.
Yeah.
And so if you haven't played in a Xerneas format, of course, like the most common partner traditionally was like a Groudon. But that's because Xerneas is very easy to create pins with. Fairy is only resisted by steel, by fire, and by poison. And all those things are weak to ground. But also, with the exception of poison, both of those things are weak to Urshifu stabs. And so it's very easy to... it's like Urshifu really is the perfect partner for Xerneas in a lot of ways. because it just covers everything that Xerneas is weak to.
Yeah. And so it's actually kind of funny, like, even with all of that stuff, a lot of those months being weak to fighting, for example, I actually, during my tournament run, from round 1 to top 8, I did not click close combat a single time this tournament. Like, not even once. I clicked Surging Strikes, I clicked Aquajet, and I clicked Detect. It just like didn't come up even into opposing Rillaboom or Shifu. I was just clicking Surging Strikes because it was just doing more damage. But I think Urshifu does, like, specifically for this tournament, it really answered the checks that people had to Xerneas. It's matching up favorably into Stack Attack, matching up really favorably into Xerneas, into Lando Eye, different months like that. Volcarona, like with Quiver Dance, for example. But kind of on the same topic, before the tournament, one Pokemon that I had really been considering was Lando Eye, Landorus Incarnate, over either the Urshifu or the Alecki slot. There was kind of always a decision between those 3 Pokemon for the last 2 slots. And a lot of that was on the back of the Focus Sash decision, right? One of Alecki or Urshifu wanted the Focus Sash, and so I wanted to put something else with ground coverage in the last slot. But, when presented with this solution, this 6 felt like the right 6 to bring.
Yeah, it's interesting you bring that up because you do not have a Life Orb on your team, and that is maybe one of the best items in the game.
Yeah.
Especially when you don't have Megas and Z moves to also increase your damage and fill up item slots. Item clause becomes a lot more difficult, but this team manages to navigate around that without using a Life Orb, which is kind of cool.
Yep.
And similarly, also, like, we talked about how fighting water is great coverage into all the things that beat Xerneas. Also, ground also covers all those things. That's why Groudon is normally there. And Landorus kind of fills that role. Although when I was testing that version of the team, I found it really hard to position Xerneas next to Landorus because you always wanted Xerneas to have either redirection support or fake out support next to it.
Yep. Yeah, and I think Landorus also makes the Kyogre matchup a lot more difficult. Even though, like, I wasn't bringing Urshifu to the standard Ogre stuff, Landorus made it really hard to team preview into, like, a lot of the more unorthodox ogre stuff, like any Trick Room Ogre or anything like that, where Urshifu would be amazing in those matchups. So I think there's always a trade-off when you're deciding on your last slots, but Lando does some stuff for Xerneas, but I think the team would have to look pretty different. There might have to be an Amoonguss or something like that.
Mm-hmm. But speaking of matchups, do you want to talk me through how you approach some of the common matchups that you see?
Yeah, so one matchup that I faced a lot in this tournament was Zacian, Incin, Rillaboom, Thundurus, Landorus, and the last slot usually was Flex, but it was like Urshifu or Alecki or something like that. And versus these teams, I would always lead Incin or Shifu with Volcarona, Xerneas in back. And that pins their Landorus turn 1 because I have a faster fake out generally than their Incin, and I have a Surging Strikes into Lando. And my Urshifu is always loving the Lando Earth Power unless they crit. And so they're forced to switch out, and then when their Zacian is on the field, I can always switch my Incin to Volcarona, and they have a hard time hitting all of my Pokemon. And they also never get their sub for free on Zacian because my Urshifu is really safe on the field. And then also, a lot of the Urshifu checks on those teams kind of come down to Rillaboom or Prankster Thundurus clicking Thunderbolt. And so I can also leave my Incin on the field and switch Urshifu out to Volcarona and to answer those things. So they just have a really hard time breaking through the Urshifu in those matchups. For opposing Xern matchups, I really like bringing Volcarona, Incin, Xerneas, and then one of Rillaboom or Urshifu, based on whatever their team requires. Because Volcarona with Struggle Bug denies their setup really well. And generally with double fake out, for example, if they don't have a Volcarona, then I'll bring Rillaboom. And with double fake out, I can set up my Xerneas more effectively than they can and kind of power through their team that way. If they do have a Volcarona, then I usually have to lead Urshifu and try and get damage on their Volc early so that my Xerneas can break through it. So that's how I would approach that matchup. Versus Tornadus Kyogre and versus Ghost Rider stuff, I would lead Alecki and Rillaboom pretty much every game. And it's usually, in those matchups, it's always about forcing a trade, right? You either get your Electroweb off and get your Xerneas into position, or you get a big Wood Hammer into one of their, into one of their major Pokemon, like into their Kyogre, or into their Ghost Rider, or into their uh, support Pokemon around that, like the Lele or whatever is switching in. And in the back, there's always a Xerneas, and there's usually an Incin to help deal with the Serena, but it kind of depends, right? Like you might bring your Shifu to Trick Room Kyogre stuff or something like that. And in the tournament, I faced a Ghost Rider where I brought Urshifu and Aleki in the lead because they had an Entei, and Rillaboom Aleki would be a really poor lead if they let Entei. So I had to bring my Urshifu to kind of counteract that. Versus other matchups, I think a lot of your standard core, like the first 4 Pokemon on the team, the Xerneas, the Incin, the Volcarona, and the Rillaboom are kind of the standard. And you can play through a lot of the matchups that aren't the ones that I just mentioned with just those 4 Pokemon, cycling your Fake Outs and cycling your Rage Powder effectively to help Xerneas get into position and just sweep. So like versus Eternatus teams, for example, they Eternatus hits a lot of the non-restricteds on this team really well, but Xerneas destroys it. And so if you can cycle your Fake Outs and get Xerneas set up effectively, then you're just going to win the game usually versus them. So that's how I'd approach most matchups.
Yeah, and obviously a lot of the metagame, like the metagame is not settled at all. There's a lot of development to go. And I'm sure this team will also undergo development as the metagame continues to progress. But as it stands right now, it definitely feels like Incin, Volk, Rillaboom, Xerneas is the team to beat. You can lead those into almost every team that isn't like Torn Ogre or some of the more refined teams that have matchups specifically into those 4 Pokemon.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, something I did want to talk about as well in terms of matchups was in top 8 of the tournament, I played Torviv, and he had Torn Ogre, but his Torn Ogre variant had a Shedinja on it. And his Serena had Grassy Glide, as opposed to... it had both Grassy Glide and Power Whip. And so in that matchup, right, that matchup is super negative for me because my only effective ways of hitting Shedinja are Incineroar and Volcarona, and both have like a really hard time lasting until the end of the game versus Kyogre teams. And also the Serena with Grassy Glide means that if I'm leading my Rillaboom Aleki, I don't actually get the benefit of Focus Sash because the Serena can always have priority to break it, pretty much. And so I think things like that are what Xerneas needs to watch out for. You know, ways that other standard cores are going to be teching to beat the Sash Aleki and to beat like the non-fire type Pokemon that can hit Shedinja, for example. I think there was another Torn Ogre in cut that had Ditto, and that's also, you know, if they're Ditto copies or boosted Xerneas, then you're really far behind. So things like that are, you know, what I would watch out for in terms of adjustment. And if you want to build on this core yourself, those are the things that you have to answer first, I think.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so while we're on the topic, are there any other notable weaknesses that you thought the team had?
I didn't face any in the tournament, but I think like Goggles Stack Attacker, for example, can give the team a hard time, especially if there's more defined Urshifu answers. Urshifu is kind of like the only stack check on this team other than cycling Fake Out and Intimidate over and over. And if stack is running Body Press, then even that's not really effective. And so Goggle Stack being able to ignore the Volcarona Rage Powder and Gyro Ball the Xerneas means that you can really never safely set up until it's dead. Other than that, one of my other friends, North, ran this team in the same tournament, and he faced a team with Crobat Groudon. And that team, like he said that it just felt impossible to win that game because you can't really bring a Lecky to that matchup because there's a Groudon and you're just, you know, you have one dead slot. And so without a Lecky, the Crobat is really hard to answer, and Sun is up, so Urshifu has a hard time. And you can't even intimidate it because the Crobat is hazing away the Intimidate boost. So, you know, like I think teams that are more hard-teched for that feel really tough for this, for Xerneas.
Mm-hmm. And if you were to continue using this team, what would you consider changing, if anything?
I'm not sure. I think the few things that I would look at adjusting are the Aleki slot as a whole, because as people are teching for Sash Aleki with the matchups that it's coming to, you know, it's just becoming more and more worthless. And it was already a matchup mon that came to 2 sets out of, you know, 12 rounds, 13 rounds or whatever. So that's definitely a slot that could be adjusted. And I think the Volcarona set has potential to be adjusted. You can always run like Quiver Dance, for example, and be more proactive into Zacian teams into opposing Xerneas teams. I think those are the 2 slots that I could look at adjusting a little bit, but I think for the most part, I would keep the structure of this team the same moving forward until something major happens in the meta.
Yeah, that makes sense. I know that we also have a team report with Rajan using a very different team that got this tournament, but you both had the Aleki Rillaboom as ways to answer Torn Ogre, which of course got first and second place in the Battle Frontier tournament.
Yeah.
And those teams, of course, were just teched out to beat teams that had Rillaboom Aleki as their Kyogre responses.
Yep.
And that's kind of the again, we saw this in Series 8. Kyogre is a crazy Pokemon, and it's such an easy Pokemon to enable, and so they really are allowed to tech their team out to respond to however they think that people are going to respond to Kyogre. So you kind of have to keep innovating as far as how to beat at least the better versions of the Kyogre team.
Yeah, and there's, especially among like the newer VGC players that started playing in 2020 onwards, there's this joke that Torn Ogre will always win the first tournament of a format that's a part of. And this is kind of the reason, right? There's so much room to tech for the very limited responses that they have. So I think finding a Torn Ogre check is kind of step one right now for everybody trying to build for, moving forward in the format. And
yeah,
you can also like utilize timer pretty well versus them, I think. So that's something to also look at in terms of options. Like playing on Showdown won't really give you that experience, so we'll see.
Yeah, actually, that's a good thing to bring up. Especially these these double fake out teams that want to set up Xerneas, they can very easily go to 16, 17, 20 turns in a game.
Yeah.
How was your experience with the in-game timer throughout your tournament run?
Timer for me was always a win con. It was never, well, no, it was a lose con in exactly one game in my tournament. But for the most part, since my team plays the way it does, I'm usually able to trade favorably. And there were many games where I had to actually timer stall the opposing Volcarona or the opposing Xerneas. I think there were like 6 or 7 games total where I had to do that as my win con. Initially, I thought it would be a much bigger deal than it was, but I was clicking pretty fast and my opponents were also clicking pretty fast. So it didn't end up being a decider every single game. But it's also very easy to use as a win con, in my opinion, especially with grassy terrain, healing every Pokemon every single turn, and Intimidate going off every other turn, and burn happening with Volcarona Flame Body and stuff like that. I think it's super easy to hit timer, and it's like a real win con that people should be playing around.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't play back in 2016, but anyone who's played back then had to learn how to really keep track of timer and played to that win con. And I guess we're just going to have to learn how to do that again. Mm-hmm. I certainly do, at least.
For sure.
But so do you want to talk about one or two notable matches from your tournament run?
Yeah, so overall in the tournament, especially during Swiss, I think I only lost 2 games total, which was kind of crazy to me. I went 2-0 in every single game. I played a lot of the same core, the Zacian, Rillaboom, Incin, Thundurus, Landorus, Urshifu core. Nerd of Now had it, Ashton Cox had it. Both of my sets versus Nerd of Now were actually pretty good. They were not easy games by any means, but I ended up 2-0ing them both in round 7 and in Top Cut. And both of those games, I think I played like very, very well. I was kind of playing on fire this whole weekend. I was super behind early game, and I managed to position my Volcarona and my Incin in such a way that his Zacian was left alone, and he couldn't actually break my Volcarona. One of my games versus, I think it was my game 2 versus him in top 8 or top 16, he actually woodhammered my Urshifu in grassy terrain, and my Urshifu lived at 5 HP, and that basically won me the game on the spot. And like, Rillaboom woodhammer is no joke. Like it's kind of crazy that I lived that. So that was really cool. I think the other game was my top 32 versus Alex. His Thundurus was actually faster than my Urshifu, where Nerd of Now's and Ashton's were both slower than my Urshifu. And so the faster Thundurus actually was a really big problem on the lead, because the Thunderbolt into my Urshifu meant that I'm basically always forced to take damage on it turn 1. And that's really bad for the Zacian endgame, because I don't have the resources to beat both Landorus and Zacian. And on top of that, his Thundurus had Thunder Wave as opposed to Scary Face. And so in my game 3 versus him, my Xerneas had actually gotten full paired 2 turns in a row. And I was just pretty much in like the worst position you could possibly be. You know, I was like, okay, well, I lost this game. I'm out in top 32. That really sucked because I felt like I was playing well. And I managed to pull this game back. It was crazy. I was positioning for like, I think the game went on for like 18 or 19 turns. I was positioning really well every turn. And I ended up making a really good read on his switch. So I Surging Strike, his Lando switched out, and I Surging Strikes instead of Aqua Jetting it. And I killed his instant on the come in. And then I managed, like, I was able to Aqua Jet his Lando the next turn, and his Zacian was left alone versus my Volcarona and my instant. And so I was able to win the game from there. And I just, you know, I felt so good after that set. I was on fire. Other than that, I think my my top 8 versus Torvi was also really good. I ended up losing the set, but you know, going into the match, I was like, man, this is just an unlosable matchup. Should I just go drop and have lunch with my friends at this point without even playing? And I played the match. I got completely trashed game 1. I didn't even get to play. The game was over in 4 turns. And game 2, I refined my game plan a little bit. I led my Lucky Real Boom. I pivoted really well. And I managed to win that game very well. And game 3, I think so what happened in game 3 was very early game. I think like turn 2 or turn 3, he made a really good read on one of my protects, and he doubled the other slot. And from that point, you know, it's the matchup is so bad, and I'm fighting an uphill battle. But I managed to bring the game back almost to the point where I could win. You know, I needed like one power whip miss or something to happen. I forget exactly what, but even losing that set, I felt really good, and I'm really happy that Torviv went on to win the tournament because I felt like his team was probably the strongest in that top cut.
Yeah. Do you know if any of your top cut matches were streamed?
I don't think any of my top cut matches were streamed, but during Swiss, I played both Nerd of Now and Ashton Cox, and they were both streaming their sets. So I think you could probably find the top 7 or round 7, round 8 matches there.
Yeah. And so I'll link those in the description if you want to see this team in action. Like I said, this is probably one of the best teams in the format, probably a team that you have seen a lot of and are going to see a lot of. And I think this is the most refined version so far. So if you are looking for a team to pick up, or if you just want to experience the thrill of clicking fake out Geomancy, then you should definitely try out this team. It really is. It's so nostalgic. And yeah, so of course there is a rental code on screen right now, and they paste in the description down below for you to try out. Thank you so much for coming on, Kunal. Do you have any final words or shoutouts?
Yeah, so shoutouts to, of course, Justin, shoutouts to Audie, shoutouts to Roshan for helping me kind of refine the movesets early on. Shoutouts to Adrian, of course, for this crazy Urshifu set. You know, I don't know if it'll be any good moving forward, but I think this was the call for the tournament, and it really worked out. And then, you know, shoutouts to all my friends that were supporting me on the way, you know, pushing me to say like, yeah, you know, this team is good. You should bring it. You feel comfortable with it, etc. It just felt really good being able to perform with all that expectation.
Yeah. It's, you know, congratulations again on your incredible run. It's really great. It was really exciting to see you make top cut and, you know, given all the work that you put into this team.
Yeah.
And I'm excited to see how you continue to innovate this archetype moving forward.
We'll see. I'll have to bring something spicy to the next tournament.
Oh, I'm looking forward to that. So thank you all for tuning in. And until next time, I will see you all later.
Peace.